going back to what we've done for you in the past and what we're going to do in the future, is I think it kind of gives you an idea in your head of, well, what if? The what ifs are the thing I like the most. Now, if we were to create a imaginary drum set for our audience, let's say an 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 kick drum snare. Mm-hmm. If I were to use all the same construction, let's say, and there's nothing wrong with doing that.
Oh, right, no.
But in fact, I've built drum sets like that forever, and they perform. They're fantastic. But if you've got an image of sound in your head or a texture that you want to hear, we can utilize all this technology. But for yucks, let's just say I made them all of the 7 and 3, 8, 10, 12 to start with. The 8s typically go bump, and then the 10 and 12 go doom, doom. So you got an interval like this, and then you got an interval like that. Mm-hmm. And how do I avoid having strange intervals? Well, what I could do is maybe on that 8, make that an X, which brings that comfortably right here.
Yeah, something I'd love to try. Actually, we've had conversations about this, of all the possible variations of the interrelation of side-by-side drums otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Each of my drums, if I think of those diameters, they have a certain sonic and more than that, almost an expressive character about them that I imagine, that ideal. And to get closer to that ideal of what an 8-inch tom, a 13-inch tom is to me always the benchmark around which I base everything. I'm really fond of and thus fussy about a 13-inch tom. So when you have all these variables of what you might want that to do and things that we hope to explore in the future, where 13-inch tom perfectly, I'd like to bring it up, have a character more towards the 12, but all the presence and dynamic tonality of a 13 classically. And high toms likewise. It's true, when you start thinking of the diameters and depths and the intervals available, it will be nice to maximize those sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, make the color of, the dynamic difference so wonderful. So, if you think about utilizing all this, now let's take our drum set with what we're looking at right here with these shells. What if we made that 8 an X? It comes down. Then we make the 10 and 12 VLT, so they're nice and round.
What's that stand for, people?
Vertical low timbre. And so we make an X shell.
That's a subject for another lesson.
Exactly. An X shell, a VLT. So you got 8, 10, 12. Then on your first floor tom, it's got to be an X. Okay, it doesn't have to be an X.
Well, in this case, I would be using quite a small one, the 15s I mentioned, that I like in a traditional floor tom place. And it's got to have, for figures and patterns and fills, I want it to have everything that a floor tom, a 16-inch floor tom would have. So that's where we maximize its depth relative to its size.
Now, so if you make that first floor tom an X, then what about its partners, next size up? To really spread those apart, let's make that VLX.
Okay.
Which is with those two. Let's.
Yeah, in my case, that would be going to a 15 to a 16. Yeah. 16 by 16 has quite a different quality. Amazing. Absolutely. We're talking about the character of individual drums. The character of floor toms in each of their common diameters is remarkably different.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, with these variations in your taste and your choice, and your needs sometimes, too, if you have a setup like the one I've been practicing with over here with floor toms, I want to maximize the voices that they can give me. And this is applicable to any size drum set, absolutely.
And I've made that kit right there, by the way, with all this technology. And then, so if you spread your floor toms apart, an X and a VLX is going to give you that separation. And when you're rumbling down there in those ranges, sometimes that's difficult.
And rumble is a good word because you want to avoid that. I love a really strong tonality in those. Yeah. And the 18-inch tom especially has so many different jobs to do in its presence, in from a open-ended bass drum quality of percussiveness that I want sometimes to a timpani roundness where a roll can just become that swell, a thunderous
and be
rumble.
Defined.
A definition.
And the definition
big quality.
On all these shells that I'm suggesting here to you, we put the reinforcing hoop in for that definition. Because if you leave them out, you have a tendency, you run the risk of things running into each other because they become so low and less defined.
Okay, great.
So that's why we put the reinforcing hoop in there. Now, if you're recording, and all this technology we were talking about here, what happens when we use birch, which is a shorter sustaining drum?
What happens?
I mean, what happens is all those characters just happen proportionately different than maple.
In what way?
Well, birch has a shorter sustain factor, and maple has a very long resonating sound. So, but for recording, sometimes you really do want birch, and various other shell configurations as well. Now, this is what I would call my ultimate SSC, specialized shell configuration. But what I really want to stress here, and I think what we're going to wind up really enjoying about this next venture we go on with a drum kit, is not necessarily my SSC, but your SSC. And I know you're thinking about it right now.
Well, yeah, there's so much to learn and absorb here, and I always totally rely upon the judgment and vision of John when it comes to something like this. He knows by now what I'm after and what sort of tunings that I prefer, and what characters. Again, I describe the character as so important to me of each individual drum that I can make room for. They're all very important, and they're all very internal to me, and how you want them to express, how you want them to speak. So I love to, I can talk in those abstractions. Describing a sound of a drum is abstract enough, and then if John can absorb that and respond to it, and we try different things, and not always with perfect success, which I love, there'll be two variations very often. When we look at a different bass drum sizes and constructions, you'll send me two different ones, and we'll see which ones work, but you'll know what the difference is beforehand because of the scientific knowledge on on wood. But it's remarkable to me. You'll say, this one has more of this quality, this one has more of this, and then I can compare them in that sort of critical way. But it's nice that this is empirical knowledge. It's not any kind of guesswork. This, as you've well seen, demonstrated sonically, it's remarkable how those different approaches to assembling a circle of wood tone out. You hear that tone just drop down in huge intervals, those changes. So the changes are radical and dynamic, and thus give you the choice. And I imagine you'll have a library of material and maybe even recorded sound of those qualities.
We're getting to that point,
of what that'll be. And you can take here two 9x13 toms, and this is what they can do for you, the voice that you're after.
And in tuning, the tuning range doesn't mean you have to tune way down there necessarily at all. What you're getting from these shells are different characters of sound. You're
Absolutely.
You're getting a flavor of the drum that you're going to be attracted to, hopefully,
Absolutely.
or not. So I encourage your own SSC. This one happens to be mine, that imaginary kit that we made.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, though. It's not that these shells will only produce that tone that you hear when they're knocked.
Right.
To combine with choice of heads and with your tuning taste, too. Yes, there is a note of that shell, but as I mentioned with high drums, I tune them higher than that, and my stroke detunes down into that fundamental that the shell provides.
It was like that 13 you were playing on that Buddy Rich Memorial thing. You said, well, I got to bring this up, and I immediately said to you, why did I make you a 12-inch tom instead of 13? You said, John, I like tuning a 13 up because I get the body of the 13, but I can get the crack off the top.
Yeah, there isn't a substitution there, but it's
and
interesting.
a light went on in my head as well.
Yeah, because I'll go into the DW showroom, for example, and just bang around like anyone lucky enough to go there would do, and hear the qualities of the different drums. And I like to use, commonly a lot of people use a looser tuning than I prefer throughout the tom range. And I like to play with that for a while and see what that does. And it can give me different inspirations, sonically and percussively especially. The big difference in attack. Throughout the range of the drum's sound, you can select for and control that character. Those are all parts of its character, of course.
I think the first time I ever made a entire VLT kit, because we've been together through all this experimentation.
I miss guinea pig. Test pilot.
And I like that. But, I remember setting them up and tuning them kind of relative to the shells. And you sat down and you played them. You said, I could never play these. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and that's the character that I was describing.
And it occurred to me right then and there, well, they don't have to be tuned way down there to get the character of the sound. So I hope we'll be thinking about the new SSC that's inside your mind right now for the next project or whatever it might be, and we'll be able to come up with something really unique.
Yeah, and for everybody, of course, for themselves, something unique to their vision of each individual drum that makes up their instrument.
It's truly, you're the boss on this one. You can make it the way you want it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.